The shimmering lights of Manhattan painted a picture of success, a picture Charles Woodward had meticulously crafted. At 45, he stood in his penthouse, a king in his glass castle, yet utterly alone. The city hummed below, a symphony of ambition and endless possibility. But none of it filled the void gnawing at him. He had everything: the power, the wealth, the legacy carved into skyscrapers, except for the very thing that would make it all matter. He needed someone to share it with, someone to carry his name with love, a child, a flesh and blood extension of himself. "I've built an empire," he'd muttered to himself, pacing through the sterile perfection of his home. But for whom? When I'm gone, what echoes? Charles had navigated the complex world of high finance with cold calculation, seeing every relationship as a transaction. Love, a liability, a messy, volatile equation he had no patience for. 2 failed marriages had only solidified this belief. Emotions are for the weak, he often stated to himself, his gaze as sharp as the edge of a diamond. Love is a breeding ground for chaos. He needed an heir, a successor, but not the baggage and the drama that came with a traditional relationship. He wanted the seed planted, but without the storm of love. One blustery afternoon, as his Lamborghini cut through traffic, Charles found himself stopped at a red light near Central Park. The usual city cacophony was his soundtrack when a figure appeared at his window. She was young, maybe in her late 20s, with a face that held both weariness and an unexpected spark in her blue eyes. She asked if he had anything for her, her voice barely a whisper. Charles, irritated by the interruption, snapped at her, "Get lost," before accelerating, his own meticulously scheduled day ruffled by her intrusion. "I've got my own problems," he thought. The incident should have been forgotten, yet he found himself haunted by her gaze. Something about it, something vulnerable and yet strangely powerful, tugged at a part of him he didn't know existed. He doubled back, driven by an impulse he couldn't explain. He found her again, a ghost in the urban sprawl. "Get in. No questions," he said, his voice still edged with that cold authority. She was hesitant, a street-smart caution in her eyes. "I'm not that kind of woman," she replied, her voice quiet but firm, her blue eyes defiant. "If that's what you think." Intrigued, he simply repeated, "Get in." The silence in the car was thick, punctuated only by the rumble of the engine. Charles glanced at her, assessing her. He had a proposal as cold and calculated as a boardroom merger. He spoke without emotion. "I'm going to make you an offer that will change your life." She turned to look at him, her expression wary. "Tell me, what's your name?" he demanded. "Antoinette," she replied, her voice soft but clear, adding softly in French, "La misère n'est pas de fin. Misery has no end." "You think I don't understand what you just said?" he retorted. "I'm a cosmopolitan businessman. Is this your way out?" She nodded, a weary acceptance settling on her face. His second question, "What would it cost for you to carry my child?" He said it as if he were buying a commodity, a business deal, not a life. Antoinette, with a sigh and a kind of melancholic beauty, said, "I lost everything, my home, my family. I can't even afford to buy my way back to France. Dreams are too expensive here." A heavy silence fell between them. Her words touched something in Charles. "I want a child, not a wife," he stated coldly. "I've had 2 marriages, too many emotional disasters. I need an heir, someone to carry my lineage, but not the emotional baggage. It's a purely transactional agreement." Antoinette's response was sharp. "Why do you need a loveless womb? Surely you have the status to find love." Charles was taken aback by the woman's unexpected challenge. "Love," he sneered, "is just a transaction disguised as emotion." He wouldn't carry the weight of empty promises again. The next few days were a whirlwind of lawyers and contracts. Antoinette was swept into his world of wealth and luxury. The penthouse was like a different planet, completely unlike her experience. As she followed Charles into his pristine home, she was struck by the sheer scale of it, and also an emptiness. "Come inside," he said, like it was a business request. Days turned into weeks. They were a study in contrasts, two people thrown together by a deal. As he pored over documents with his lawyer, Tom, Antoinette was a quiet presence in his office, studying him as he did not study her. Tom Francis was clearly struck by her beauty, offering her a rare compliment. "You are stunning, Mississippi." Antoinette lifted her gaze, a faint smile on her lips. The contract was signed, a sterile document detailing the terms of their arrangement. Charles, used to controlling every aspect of his life, never expected what came next. He wasn't used to someone confronting him so directly. He was so used to the status that the engine of it all was beginning to fall away for him. Charles woke one morning, a strange feeling lingering, a weight of responsibility he'd never experienced. He was heading to the wing where Antoinette slept when the contract he'd signed began to feel like a living document, one that was beginning to write itself. He didn't realize that no matter how we try to define our desires on paper, the heart always holds the final say. The fertility clinic was a stark contrast to the city outside, sleek, clinical, and utterly devoid of emotion. Antoinette found herself caught between the logic of the agreement and the unfolding miracle happening inside of her body. They sat in awkward silence, agreeing, accepting, but not connecting. The process was precise, calculated, as though they were merely data points in a scientific experiment. As the days passed and she underwent the medical procedures, Antoinette experienced a shift. "This isn't just a contract, this is a life," she whispered to herself, staring at the ceiling, a hand resting on her growing abdomen. "A life I will love." Her world was changing, expanding. And Charles, a man who thought he had all the answers, was starting to feel completely lost. Antoinette's words about legacy resonated with Charles. "It's not about wealth or agreement," she'd stated in a quiet moment. "It's about the souls we touch and the lives we create." They weren't fulfilling just a clause, but building a life. It was a seed of life growing, not wealth or control. Their interactions became softer, less transactional. They were still two strangers in a gilded cage, but now they were acutely aware of the life unfolding within Antoinette. They were like a river finding its path to an unknown destination. One visit to the clinic, a bridge between the mundane and the profound. Charles took her hand, his grip soft and gentle. He couldn't help it. He just knew that the heart hears the existence of new life and beats in time with it. During the ultrasound, as the doctor pointed to the screen, it became clear what was growing: triplets. Charles, who had always hidden his emotions, leaned in, curious, perhaps even a little scared. The doctor then delivered the unexpected, stating, "There's something else you need to know." Suddenly, Charles realized that the woman beside him wasn't just a vessel for his child. She was his partner in the greatest miracle of all. He found himself standing in the doorway of his living room, watching her. There was a change in her demeanor, a softness. The setting sun seemed to embrace her. Without overthinking, he lifted her into his arms. "You don't have to. I can walk," she said in surprise. He replied softly, "I know," and carried her inside. She had started to settle into her life, her world. The room had become a sanctuary, growing along with her body and the triplets. "What is this?" she whispered. "I wanted you to feel comfortable. I thought you might like it." He was no longer giving orders. He was taking a step closer to the human experience. Their hands would brush, a shared glance would linger. A warmth he had kept at bay was beginning to seep through. They both knew that they were on a journey neither had expected. The day of the birth arrived, the Lamborghini's engine a pale comparison to the frantic beating of their hearts. One hand resting on her round belly, Antoinette looked at Charles, seeing the change he had undergone. "I'll be right here with you," he assured her softly, his voice full of a resolve that had nothing to do with money or power. "Thank you," she whispered, tears welling up in her eyes. In the delivery room, 3 tiny cries filled the air, 3 lives born of their arrangement, a new beginning born from old contracts. Antoinette was overcome with emotion, caressing her children's tiny faces, tears streaming down her face. Charles was speechless, a feeling he had not been familiar with. It was life in its purest form. He was finally connected to something he couldn't buy, control, or predict. But amid the joy, he saw that Antoinette's tears weren't just happy ones. He realized that love, even when born from a contract, could surpass any deal made on paper. At that moment, everything had changed. Later that evening, Charles discovered Antoinette's room transformed with flowers. His trusted lawyer, Tom Francis, sat by her side, holding her hand. A strange feeling churned inside him, and he froze. Tom was speaking quietly, words Charles overheard that hit him hard. "You are an incredible woman," Tom was saying, "and you deserve to be loved unconditionally." Charles stepped into the room, his face thunderous. Charles, confused and hurting, said, "What is going on, Tom? You are in her hospital room just hours after giving birth." Tom rose to his feet calmly. "I'm offering her something real, a home, without pressure, without contracts. Just us." He then got on one knee and revealed a ring. "Antoinette, will you marry me?" Charles was overwhelmed and out of control. He never imagined the situation would spiral out of control. Charles stood by the bed, not knowing what to say. Tom cast one look back at Antoinette. "Rest, Antoinette, I'll be here if you need me," Tom said before he exited the room, leaving Antoinette with Charles. Silence hung between them, a heavy truth neither was willing to admit. The following morning, Antoinette watched her children sleep peacefully in their cribs. The love she felt was overwhelming, but she knew this could be her last time holding them. "I should have remained a wanderer," she said to herself, rather than endure this agony, her heart breaking into a million pieces. Charles walked into the room and saw her pain. "It's because you've fallen for him, isn't it?" Charles said. Antoinette's face was now a storm of pain and confusion. She replied, "You don't understand anything. This isn't about Tom Francis." She was referring to the last clause of the contract. She had to leave. This would be her last 90 days in this country. Charles looked her directly in the eyes. "I don't want you to go." His voice was low, filled with an emotion he hadn't felt before. "I don't care about the contract or the deal. The only thing I care about is you staying here with our children with me. I'm not asking you to love me. Even if you love Tom, just stay. Stay for the triplets." Antoinette watched him, his face a study in vulnerability. He said, "I love you too, Antoinette. I've loved you all this time. Please stay, not for the children, not because of the contract, but for us. Will you be my wife, my true love?" Tears streamed down Antoinette's face as she looked at Charles, a man she had grown to love, despite the circumstances. "Yes," she whispered, "yes, love, in its most unexpected form, had blossomed in the sterile landscape of a contractual agreement." Remember, a life well lived is a tapestry woven with love and meaningful connection. If this story touched your heart, give us a like, and don't forget to subscribe. Share your stories with us, and we can create together a warm and welcoming community. We have more meaningful stories on the way, so don't miss out. Until next time, be well.